During this video I'm going to show you how to apply 3 basic washes. These are the building blocks for watercolour, and you'll find once that you've been practicing these for some time and feel quite confident, you can move on and you can paint into a wet surface. You can create soft edges or crisp outlines. You can make one colour bleed very gently into another and get all those lovely soft hazy effects that we associate with watercolour. So for now I'm going to teach you how to apply a flat wash of colour, which is this one here. This is where the tonal value is the same throughout. It doesn't change from light to dark at all. Then we move on, and the second example I will show you how to paint a graduated wash, which, as you can see, moves from light through to dark. Our third sample will be moving again from light through to dark, but you can see now we've used 2 different colours, 2 different blues. And then the very last quarter can be your first painting. It's a silhouette of some tulips. I've applied a flat wash as a background over the entire area. Once that was dry, I could then paint the individual shapes of the tulip silhouette. Before we begin, let's just run through the materials that you're going to need. Firstly, my palette. I actually use an ice cube tray. It's wonderful. It's got lovely deep wells, so you can make up plenty of wash and it won't evaporate. I've got the 2 paints ready to use that I will use throughout this demonstration. This one here is ultramarine. It is widely available in most manufacturers' ranges. This one here is manganese. It's a transparent pigment and it's a cool blue, one that favours green, whereas this one favours purple. Any cool blue that is nice and transparent will do a good job, so a phthalo cyanine blue would also be very effective. Here I've got 2 brushes. This one here is a natural fibre. It's made from squirrel hair. Sable is often used for watercolour as well. It holds a large, generous proportion of wash, but also gives a good point when wetted. Here I've got a man-made fibre brush. I use this one for mixing up washes because it doesn't hold too much wash and can easily be rinsed out. This little sponge here I use for removing excess wash or water from my brush during painting. Here are pipettes, so you can transfer clean water into your well for a small amount of wash. If you want something larger, this little jug can be poured directly into the well. I have 2 containers of water. This one I keep as clean water, which I use to make the washes with. This one here I use to rinse out my brush, so that can get fairly dirty. This one over here is my little bit of scrap paper, watercolour paper, and I can test out each of the washes I mix so that I know when I start to paint the washes are going to be just what I am wanting. Let's begin by starting off mixing the wash for the first demonstration I will do. The first one is going to be a flat wash, which means it's going to be the same tonal value, that's talking in terms of light or dark, throughout the entire wash. So we'll create an even tone over our paper. So let's begin by putting a little bit of water into that well. I usually recommend that people put in a generous amount of water, more than they think that they will require for that given area. There's nothing worse than running out and trying to have to remix the same wash over again, so play safe. I'm now going to add my ultramarine blue. As I say, this is a warm blue. It favours purple, and I'm going to mix that into my water. Make sure you've got all the surplus out of the brush and give it a good mix up. Now I can tell just by looking at that that's going to be fairly dilute. Let me show you. So I think we can add some more pigment to the wash. And again, ensure that it all is off your brush and that you've mixed it all up well. Ultramarine blue is quite a sedimentary colour. It will sit at the bottom of your well and it needs mixing up all the time you're using it. It's got heavy pigment particles. Right, let's try this one. Okay, I think I'm happier with that. Right, so for the first wash, it will be a flat wash of colour. So now we're ready to begin our wash. We have our ultramarine blue mixed up with water here. Remember, this is a pigment that needs a little bit of stirring before you use it. I'm using an already wetted brush that's been dabbed onto the sponge to remove the surplus water. And now I'm ready to start. It's important that you use a very gentle pressure, and I'm starting at the top there and working my way across the area. Reloading my brush. Now that's important. It's necessary to have a fully loaded brush so that your paint is flowing down the page. You probably also notice that I've got my board on a tilt. Just less than 45 degrees is quite a good angle, and you can support the end of your board with anything you like. Now, notice that I'm working from left to right and then right to left. The pressure on the brush remains very gentle all the way across, and the pressure should be constant. When you first begin, don't worry if you get some stripy effects. It's alright, that's generally what happens with students who start from the beginning. With practice, you'll learn how to control the pressure, the amount of wash in your brush, the direction and the movement. Notice when I get to the edge, I'm just channeling down a little way to remove the surplus wash. The brush is held so that you draw it along the page, not quite on its side, but certainly not on the point. I think I've got a little bit of debris there. Let's take that away. And remembering to fully load your brush, that is so important. We really do want the paint flowing down the page. Not worrying about getting a straight line across the side. I'd like you to really focus on the application rather than keeping to the lines. So this paper is actually a quarter. I've divided a half sheet into quarters, and we're just working on 1/4 here. And you can see that tonal value remains the same throughout. I've got a very young cat in the house at the moment and she's crying. You make all the preparations you can, turn the phones off, and what do you get? She has to have a little say. And final stroke coming across here. Now, what's going to happen now is your paint will continue to run down the page, and you're going to pick up the excess with what I call a thirsty brush. Let me just show you how I do that. Take my brush, wet it and dab it onto the sponge. That removes most of the water. You don't want to remove all of it, but most of it. And then you take the tip of your brush and it literally sucks it up. It's called thirsty because it can take on more wash. And that's it. So that's your first wash. That's called a flat wash. We're now going to mix up the washes that we'll require to make the next sample, which is going to be a graduated wash. And graduated means that it changes from light through to dark gradually throughout the quarter of the sheet. So we're going to mix up the washes for that, and I think we can start by putting a little bit of water in to a couple of the wells. And if you've got enough of your first wash left, you might be able to use that as the darkest one. I think I'm going to add just a little bit more, because remember I need to have enough to cover the area. And I think we can use 4 washes this time, each one getting a little darker than the one before. Okay, right, now let's put some ultramarine into all of these washes. Let's make this the very lightest. Just a little tiny bit goes in there. I'm going to add a little bit more to this next one, so hopefully that will be now a little bit darker. And then we're going to add even more into this one here. Now, I'm not sure at the moment how light or how dark they are. It's very hard to tell unless you actually try them out on your spare bit of paper. Which is just over here. Can you get that? Okay, let's just see where we are at this stage. That's my most dilute, the lightest colour. Followed by this one here. Okay, so that's a reasonably small step, that's what we're looking for. Then into this wash here, and again that's progressing quite nicely. Let's just test this one again. It might need, oh no, that's actually looking quite good, isn't it? Okay, perhaps a touch more paint into this one here. And I'm wondering whether just a tiny bit more into this one. Let's empty my brush into that one and retry. Well, that doesn't look any different, does it? Let's put a little bit more in. Try that one again. Okay, that's the first one. And let's have a little look at what we've got there now. That's better, isn't it? Not such a big jump. That's the third one. And that's the fourth one. Now I'm actually feeling that this has gone a little bit too far. So let's take a little drop more water into that one. Take your time when you're mixing up the washes. Doesn't matter how long it takes. Now, did you notice there that I had quite a lot of wash on my brush? That can be deceiving. That can make it look darker than it really is. So I'm going to retest those. One. So try to test each one in a similar way, and you might notice that I'm dabbing off the surplus on the sponge each time. And wash number 4. Okay, I'm happy with that now. So there we are, we've got very dilute, gradually adding more pigment into the washes until we've got the most concentrated at the end there. So light to dark. And that's the order in which we're going to apply them as well. Remember to rinse out your brush very, very well before you start on your next wash. It holds an awful lot of wash, so give it a good rinse and ensure that you've also taken off all of the surplus water. So we can now load our brush with the most dilute wash. This is very important. It's accepted that you put the light washes, the more dilute washes on first. And if you follow that general rule of thumb, you won't go too far wrong. Now, fully loaded, and once again we start off at the top of that quarter with our lightest wash. Keep that brush fully loaded and we want to come down about 1/4 of the way down our paper. So I think we're just about there now, aren't we? Now I'm going to load my brush up now with the second wash, but what I haven't done is I haven't rinsed out the first wash. This means every time I put my brush into the wash, I'm going to pick up a little bit more, and this way we make a smooth transition through the tonal values. If you find you get a streaky result, don't worry, that's really very normal at the start of learning to paint with watercolours. Now I'm moving into the third wash, and the reason for this is that you need to get used to using a light, even pressure, ensuring that you reload your brush fully, and that it's a nice full brush, and in that way you will you'll be able to ensure a good result. It's not easy when you talk and paint at the same time. So this is my third wash, and I'm going to start the transition now into the darkest, quick stir, fully loaded brush, but I didn't rinse it out in between, and that ensures that you get an even smoother transition. And you should be beginning to see now how we've changed from a light tonal value through to a dark tonal value. And coming up towards the end now. Okay. And that's my last stroke. I'm now absorbing quite a lot of that wash out of the brush. So we've now got a thirsty brush, and we can pick up that row of excess paint. Repeat that a couple of times until the paint has stopped running down the sheet of paper. There we are, graduated wash. Now we're moving on to the third quarter on our page, and I've already mixed up the paint for you. Let's just see these being tested out, and you can see what I've got. That's our most dilute wash, and that's the cool blue. And that one. Now the third one, you'll notice, is a mixture of the cool and the warm blue. So both of those blues have gone into that wash. And you'll also notice we're getting darker and darker as well. And for that reason it's called a variegated wash, which means it has two colours in it. In fact, you can have 3 or 4 colours. So there we are. There's our washes ready to go. Let's put this to one side. And once again, I've got a brush, I've rinsed it all out, squeezed off all the excess so that I don't change the dilution of my first wash. And as before, a fully charged brush. You can see that virtually has taken up all of that wash in that from the palette. Right, here we go. Light, even pressure across the row. The tip of the brush just picks up the bead of paint from the previous stroke. And then making the transition to the next wash. So I haven't emptied out my brush of the first wash. I've moved straight into it so that we get an even better transition. So left to right and right to left. And I think we're just about ready to move into the next wash. Now this one's the combination. Fully loaded. It's just my luck, isn't it? That little hair there. Never mind. We leave that, don't worry about that. You can brush it off when the wash is dry. I can't emphasise enough the lightness of pressure that you need, or the fullness of brush. Both of those are very important. What we don't want to do is work over an area that we've already put paint on. There's a huge temptation to tickle and fiddle around with the paint if it's not quite as you wanted it to be. But if you can resist it, that's brilliant, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to end up with something that you're displeased with. Oh, nice light pressure. Keep that maintained across that row. And we're almost ready to change into our very last wash. So once again, I haven't rinsed out the brush from the previous wash of paint. I've just made the transition by putting my brush straight into the next wash. I'm painting a slightly equal angle here. I'm surrounded by lighting and cameras and camcorders and such like. So there we are, just finishing off now with our last strokes. And you can afford to take that off at the end of the page, nothing wrong with that. Thirsty brush once more, and we're going to pick up the excess. And just draw that along like that. You'll find it settles down and continues to move down the page for a couple of minutes. So continue to remove the excess paint, and then you can lay your board flat to dry. For the last quarter, we're going to do something a little bit more interesting. I've already applied a graduated wash over this area, so that will act as the background. And I'm now going to start filling in the individual shapes of this flower. I give this design to the students in my beginners course, and when they come to that particular session they will have already traced through the design onto this fourth quarter. You can choose whichever background type you want. It could be a flat wash or a graduated or even the variegated wash. But we're going to work now on the individual shapes within this design. Now I've just got a smaller version of the brush I originally had, and I'm using an ultramarine blue. We're going to draw down the side and across the top of that shape, just a little way, not too far. And then we're going to do exactly the same as we've done before, horizontally, left to right, right to left, with a well-loaded brush. This time, however, you won't need to reload your brush for every single stroke. I've just reloaded it again there, and I'm pulling that bead of paint down the page with a left to right and a right to left action. And once again, plenty of paint is on the brush. And once again, I'm working on a sloping surface, so my board is supported at the top end to create a slope that's about 40 degrees. And finishing off by completing that shape. I'm just now going to give myself a thirsty brush, so I've dabbed off the excess, and I can then put the tip of my brush into that bead of paint and remove the excess. Now we're ready to move on to the next shape. If you prefer, you could wait for this shape to dry before moving on to the next one. If you're wanting to get on with the design and work it all in one go, you can do that, but we need to leave a small space between the shapes. So right there where it joins the previous shape, I'm going to leave a little tiny gap. I tend to start at the top left of the design because I'm right-handed, and in that way I won't be putting my hand into wet paint. And thirsty brush again to just pick up the drips. Make sure you keep the ultramarine blue well stirred. So we come channel down, leaving a gap, and channel down the side of that shape again, just a little way. This is to allow the excess to run away from the area you're working on. But if you bring it too far down, it could start to dry before you actually get to it. So just a little way. And again, we're leaving that gap. Right to left and left to right. Don't allow that brush to run thin of paint. Keep it well loaded. Right to left and left to right. And we can channel down the shape a little bit further. Use the point of your brush to do the channeling so that you can direct your brush carefully around the previously painted shapes. It's actually an awful lot easier to fill in small shapes like this than it is the big background area. You'll be relieved to hear. There we are. And every shape is done in exactly the same way. We don't alter our technique at all. But we do have the option of turning the board if we want to, or if we feel it's more appropriate. I think when you come to the stems, you might feel if you turn your board so that you're working across them like that. And let's just pick up that bead of paint from there. If you find you're getting white dots where you're lifting your paint, it means you probably absorbed too much paint from your brush. It's a little bit too thirsty. So just absorb some. And I'm going to finish off with this last shape here. Channel down the side a little way, and I'm using the very tip of the brush just to get in there without touching the previous area of wet paint. Channeling down the side. It's quite a tricky area, this. It's quite small. Left to right and right to left. As you become more experienced, you can alter this basic horizontal method. But for now, I think it's probably the safest one that you can use when you're learning. And it's surprisingly how quickly it all builds up. So there we are, we've got one flower head done already. There we go, thirsty brush, picking it up. That's it. Right, the rest of the design is painted in exactly the same way. So I'm going to get busy with this one and then I'll show you the finished article. And when you reach the end, you will have completed your tulip silhouette. Good luck.